Hi, my name is Dave Such. Welcome to my channel where we talk about all things spiritual. Today we're going to be talking about a rather difficult subject, and that is suicide. And the reason I'm making this video today is because I get invited to be on various online channels to talk about near-death experiences and things like that. And in one of the interviews, the subject of suicide came up, and I mentioned that heaven frowns upon suicide. And after the interview was posted, somebody looked up my email and sent me a very scolding letter telling me, I've had suicidal thoughts. How dare you shame people who are going through a rough time and that sort of thing and judge us. And I wanted to clear up the subject of suicide and the way heaven feels about it. Now, I've got to give a little disclaimer here. Although I am a certified spiritual counselor, I am not certified for treating depression, mental illness, suicidal thoughts, or any other mental, physiological, or psychological condition. The information in this video is not intended as a substitute for your current healthcare treatment. So if you are having suicidal thoughts, I would encourage you to continue to seek healthcare from medical professionals who are trained, educated, and have experience in dealing with patients who have suicidal thoughts. Now, that being said, out of the 1,200 plus near-death experience testimonies I've heard in the last 17 years of NDE research, I'm going to say maybe about 20 or 30 of those were from suicides. And in my near-death experience research, these people arrive in heaven. Some of them meet the being of light, this incredible, beautiful, loving being that is always gentle and speaks with the utmost kindness and respect and outpouring of unconditional love that's so strong that it can't be described in human words. And the only time I hear the being of light, who we call God, speak sternly is to a person who had a near-death experience from suicide and say things like, who are you to decide when you're going to die? Or you can't take your life, it is not yours to take, and that kind of thing. So I wanted to really clear up how heaven and how God feels about suicide. Now, they're not judgmental. Earth is the most difficult planet in this galaxy in which to incarnate into, and it's the third most difficult in the entire universe. So this is a tough place, and it is normal and natural for some people to become depressed and want their lives to end. And I was there myself, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. So Earth being such a difficult place, all of heaven knows how much we suffer down here. They're aware what we're going through. God experiences everything we experience. So if you're in pain and suffering right now, the Almighty Creator, the benevolent source of all life that is completely aware of your suffering. And there's no judgment from heaven. There's sadness, that we threw in the towel before our time was up, but there's no judgment. There never is. Regardless of whatever we do down here on earth, our decision to act in light or darkness, our decision to be kind or cruel, we are never judged. We are loved no matter what we do. And that includes suicide. And it's not the end. There's no condemnation. There's no punishment in hell if you commit suicide. Out of all the testimonies I've heard, only about 3% were negative near-death experiences. And even though I wouldn't say that most people who have near-death experiences from suicide have negative experiences, it is far more common for a person who has an NDE from suicide to have a negative near-death experience. Now, I think it's important to mention here that every near-death experience I've ever heard where they reported it was negative, a hellish experience, in every single case, and I heard this from another near-death experience researcher like myself, when a person cries out to heaven for help, they are always rescued 100% of the time. So if you have a near-death experience and you find yourself in a hellish place, call out to God or heaven for help. And I believe with all of my heart you will be rescued. Now let's talk about some of the problems that suicide creates. The first is it devastates family and friends, the people that care about you and love you. Now, when I was in the worst of my suicidal thoughts, I didn't think anybody cared. And that thought was, I'm going to say, a false belief. There's always people who care. And even though they may not show it, they do care. And there's people who aren't your family and friends, but complete strangers who care. I care about you staying here, everybody staying here as long as possible, because Earth is an incredible part of the engine of growth of creation. It's really important for us to be here, take care of our bodies, extend our lives as long as possible. This is a beautiful experience down here, as tough as it can be. And I'm not monetized yet. I make no money from this video. I'm doing this because I care. I don't want people to check out early, and I want them to make the most of their lives here and stick through it, no matter how difficult it becomes. So it devastates family and friends. That's the first problem. The second issue is that it throws a wrench in the work for groups in their soul planning. So before we come down here to Earth and have a physical life, we are in a soul group in heaven, and it's like sort of a family of people that you go and you have adventures with and incarnate into physical lives, and you choose the various roles. Now, let me give an example of how a suicide can affect those plans. Let's say two souls decide, okay, I'm going to be the man, you're going to be a woman, we're going to get married, we're going to have 3 children, and one of them is going to be this other soul who's going to invent a cure for this specific kind of cancer. Well, if one of those two parents gets depressed and kills themselves, the children don't get born, and then that cure for cancer doesn't come along. So it really throws a wrench in the works of the other souls that you went through your soul planning with, the soul group, the family in heaven that you're closest to. And of course, the third problem it creates is it is a setback in the development of any soul. So the reason we have physical lives is to grow and to develop and help with the engine of growth of creation. We're a critical part of that. And when we end our lives early, that is a huge setback in our own development. And there's a lot of work that has to be done. It's not the end of the world. And again, there's no punishment. God's not going to burn you in hell because you killed yourself. We are loved no matter what we do. But it's a real big setback. And it's just like, you're going to college and you've got to get this college degree. And you're in this class that's really difficult and you drop out. Well, guess what? You just created more work for yourself. Now you're going to have to go back. You're going to have to take the class again. You have to do it right this time. And that's what happens. So it creates those 3 big problems. And many people who have near-death experiences from suicide are instantly aware of this. It's very common in those NDEs where they were from suicides for them to say, when they were in the afterlife, I immediately realized I made a mistake. I immediately realized I took a bad situation and made it 10 times worse. So let's talk about an actual near-death experience from suicide and what happened to this woman. Angie Fenimore spent her childhood growing up in a cult in a remote area. They had no electricity. She was being sexually abused by her alcoholic father. And when she became an adult from this difficult childhood, she got involved in alcohol abuse and drug abuse. She got married, had a few children, and her husband was an abusive man as well. So dealing with depression and this past and never being happy, she one day decided to end her life. So she slashed her wrists and took an overdose of pills, and she died and had a near-death experience.
I heard a voice, and it said, "Is this what you really want?" And I looked to see where the voice was coming from.
The words had come from above.
I could see a pinpoint of light that looked just like a little star, and it grew in intensity and came toward me very quickly.
But the light wasn't a star. It was a being who was made of light.
And as he approached, I realized that this was God. I didn't have to be told. It was like the universe reverberated his name. And then he said, "You can't take your life. It's not yours to take. And life is supposed to be hard. You have to pass through these things. All of us have done this." And I was filled as he spoke to me with understanding about the purpose of life and what we're doing here and how important it is to think about how you treat other people. I could feel this incredible love and peace and compassion coming from him, and pain as well. And I knew that this was for what I had done.
Now, if you're going through severe depression or anxiety or mental illness and you're having suicidal thoughts, I want you to know you're not alone. I was there myself many years ago. I became severely depressed. I had chronic pain, which I have since healed from, but I had 20 years of worsening chronic pain. I was confined to a mobility scooter. I was living in a 10 by 10 shed that was purchased from a home improvement store and fixed up like a little tiny home. My shower and kitchen were outdoor, and I had to walk 50 feet away to go to the bathroom. And I was just lonely, riddled with pain. My life had no purpose or meaning, and I saw no end to it. In my mind, this was just going to get worse, and the only way to get out of it was to knock myself off. But at that time, I had already started my near-death experience research, and the only really thing that was stopping me from doing that was, number one, I knew it was going to devastate my family and friends. Number two, I knew that heaven frowned upon suicide, that it's kind of a no-no, and it was just going to make things worse. And number three, I was scared to do it. But I was thinking about all sorts of things. I was thinking, well, maybe I can just do all sorts of dangerous things, start hang gliding and scuba diving and skydiving and, go swimming in shark-infested waters or do something that's going to knock myself off without really, it being my fault or my decision. Well, that's just manipulating the system. I mean, I would be essentially suffering the same consequences as any other suicide. And so I didn't do it. And I would have never even considered it if I knew what was coming. I know life down here on earth can be difficult. Some people have had such difficult circumstances in their childhood and their adult lives. They've been abused, abandoned, betrayed, dealt with all sorts of physical and emotional trauma. Hang in there. Don't give up. No matter how tough life gets, never give up on life. And remember that just because you're struggling doesn't mean you're failing. And keep your mind on what could be. Because if I had known what was coming, if I had known that I was going to heal from my physical problems, my mobility scooter is sitting in the other room on the other side of this wall right here collecting dust. I haven't used it in years. If I knew about the beautiful wife that I was going to meet and marry and the great life I have now, it's not without its problems. I still have my down days, but most of my days are filled with peace and joy. If I had seen this life I have now coming, I would not have considered it. Now, some people are going to struggle their whole lives, and some choose to do that. People can put themselves in their soul planning through all sorts of difficult experiences for their own benefit, for learning, for growth, for spiritual advancement. And that can include an abusive childhood. It can include drug addiction. It can include mental illness. These are all things that souls will choose, these challenges, in their pre-soul planning before they come here as a learning experience. The one thing that is never used from a spiritual perspective as a learning experience is suicide. It has zero benefit. So please, if you're considering suicide or if you're having suicidal thoughts, I encourage you to get help anywhere you can. Talk to somebody you think that might care about you, or call medical professionals, get help, seek help. There is a suicide 3-digit hotline. It's 988. That's 988. Now, you might get put on hold, so if it's an emergency situation where you're at the point of doing it, call 911. Many years ago, I had to call 911 for a friend of mine who had took a pill overdose, and the medical professionals came and they, treated her, and she's still alive and well today and having a bit better of a life. She's still struggling, but hang in there, get help. No matter what happens, never give up on life. You don't know what's coming. And even if your soul has chosen to have an extremely difficult life filled with pain and suffering, someday that life is going to be over naturally, and you will benefit and you will learn from all the pain and suffering that you've struggled here. I will never forget the one near-death experience testimony I heard where this guy was a businessman and he died and had a near-death experience, and he was speaking with this angelic being in heaven, and the angelic being was explaining things to him and teaching him all this stuff, and he said, well, things aren't always as they appear. The people we judge as failures are not always failures. And the guy says, well, what do you mean? He says, well, I want to show you something. And they go back in their spirit form down on earth, so nobody can see them. They're in their spirit form. And he brings them to the entrance of his office building. and shows him this homeless man, this alcoholic homeless man who was always outside of this man's office building begging for change. And he said, "What do you see here?" And the guy says, "Well, it's just, a homeless man, alcoholic, who's just kind of failed in life, and, he's begging for money, probably to buy more alcohol." And this angelic being says, "Okay, I'm going to show you who this person really is." And they showed him his spirit, the spirit of this homeless alcoholic man. And it was this beautiful, highly advanced, highly spiritual angelic person who had chosen a life as an alcoholic homeless person in order to help teach compassion for these businessmen who were coming out of this building every day. So, remember, struggling is not failure. So hang in there. You're not a failure. Life may stay tough, but it may get better, and you never know. And someday, when these lives end naturally, you're going to be back home, safe and sound, and you're going to see all the benefits that this earthly life had. Well, that's it for today. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, keep spreading your light and love.